lunch in approximately in time, so we will get started with the second session. Now Warren and Mary is sitting here, sitting now. And so our first speaker for the second session is Joseph from Sony Albany, and he's internationally known figures in atmospheric science for many of his work. He's a director of the Atmospheric Science Research Center in Sony, and also the Empire Innovation Professor of the Sony system. And Everette has been many vice board in terms of UCAD Board of Trustees, and also NOAA's Science Advisory Board, and he's done many work in climate and weather, now leading big programs in the observations, so modeling and everything. So without further ado, Everette take the stage.
Thank you. So Greg said the fun begins, right? Hopefully I can be serious and really, give tribute to Warren. And so it's a real honor for me to have the opportunity to share with you some thoughts today about how Warren has impacted Warren's work. And Mary too. Mary was the first person I saw this morning when I walked in, and we had a little sidebar, as we always do. But how Warren, has impacted me, and and so this talk really follows in line with Bill's talk and Marshall's talk. And unlike Marshall, I never went to the Mount for the talk. But but in other ways, Warren has really impacted me. And so when Greg called me up, immediately accepted the opportunity to speak here today. I got worried because my research, I'm not a modeler. I haven't done work. I started out as a modeler, but most of my career wasn't in modeling and GCM, so I worried about what I would say. But immediately, this title popped into my head. It's a path illuminated by wisdom, courage, and grace. And it's really how as a role model, Warren's wisdom, his rigor, his courage, and his grace has really shedded light on me and my career paths. So I first encountered Warren's wisdom really in the literature as a graduate student. And so, like Warren, my background is in, my bachelor's degree is in physics. And so as a newly minted physics student, I knew I wanted to work in climate. I wanted to work with a climate modeling group, and I got accepted. And so sitting down with my advisor, talking about the work that we would do, and my advisor was telling me about GCMs and how they've done all this work in terms of absorption, gaseous absorption, and treating that radiatively in a model. And they were working on clouds and sort of lower clouds and how clouds overlapped on these GCM grids. And so started talking to me about cirrus clouds, and cirrus clouds, they covered a significant percentage of the globe relative to other clouds. They played an important role in the radiative properties of the atmosphere. And I think Stephen Snyder had come out with this paper about 2 times CO2 and how cloud distribution had changed, and there were more higher level clouds and lower level clouds, and that was radiatively important and thus had an impact on the climate. So I went off and did all this reading. And there wasn't that much observations out there on cirrus clouds, so it wasn't too much to learn about cirrus clouds. There were more about clouds, but what we talked about was how do you represent these processes, these clouds in GCMs, and so that was the big thing for me, because again I hadn't had a meteorology class, I hadn't had an atmospheric science class, and so I was a physics major in it, and so this thing about GCMs, and that was confusing to me. I mean, what are GCMs, and so I, again, dug into the literature to try to really understand this. And Warren was my savior because of this book. And this is, I couldn't find an image of the first edition, but it's the first edition that I really encountered. And so, this book on three-dimensional climate modeling really was the Bible, for me as a graduate student, to really understanding about modeling. And the neat thing about this was that it was really written at the level of a graduate student and an undergraduate. And it provided, and this is something I'm going to come back to towards the end, is how Warren always provides a historical perspective for things. And this book was important in that it provided a historical perspective for climate model development, really accessible numerical methods that are used in modeling, and talked about fundamental processes for atmosphere, sea, ocean, etc., etc., and then gave applications, of these models and how well they perform. And there were other works that were there. Again, we were sort of worried about the radiative properties of clouds, and so. But I think the papers that Warren and Jerry and others and Steve Snyder and other people wrote allowed me to understand. So, if you look at these studies that looked at cirrus clouds, we basically used 1D models. And so we looked at 1D models and we looked at radiative properties. But what was really important was really understanding how these radiative processes impacted circulation and impacted broader climate. And there was a number of experiments that Warren and Jerry and others did that really demonstrated that. So it really helped me to understand really the importance of these properties, these clouds and their properties and impacting the system. And I think Ruby gave a really nice talk this morning. And this is something that I was thinking about on what we learned, how we learned from what we learned from Warren, or sort of the foundation that Warren really built in terms of enabling us to understand the coupled system. And Bill also gave a great talk on that as well, and how really we stand on the shoulders of giants now, because they've enabled us to take on these grand challenges in Earth system sciences, and even human dimension. And so I think that's a debt that we really owe to Warren and those modelers at that time that really developed this coupled system ability. So I'm going to go back before I say that. So going through the literature, looking at Warren in the literature, I'd never met him, right? And so I was in my corner of the world in Albany. And also I hadn't met Greg and Vernon, and so I didn't know there were other people that looked like me in the field. And as Marshall pointed out, there still aren't very many, right? And so the only person that was at Albany, fortunately, was Harry Hamilton. And, but Harry was already a dean. And so I only saw Harry every once in a while, but Harry would meet me in somewhere in the quad and talk to me. But I hadn't met Warren. And so my advisor held a modeling meeting, and so he asked us to show up as graduate students. So I showed up and sat somewhere in the back, and there are all these famous modelers that showed up, like Jeff Keel and a lot of the NCAR folks, some cloud people like Tom Ackerman, and then Warren had a talk, and so they introduced Warren Washington, and I'm sitting there, and he walks down. And this was the expression. Because he looked like me. And so Marshall was just talking about that. And I was really stunned that, this guy that I've been reading about in literature all the time, who did all this work, and really helped me understand GCMs, and how they work, and how my work fit into that, was really someone who looked like me. And I was shocked by that. And I don't think I met him then, but at subsequent meetings I met Warren, and he's always, as Marshall says, been gracious. And so as a result of that, I ended up with a dissertation, in cirrus clouds and how they worked in GCMs. So in terms of courage, so that's Warren's wisdom, how Warren's wisdom has impacted me. In terms of courage, I think it's important, and Marshall talked about this. Reading Marshall's article really inspired me to sort of talk about Warren's courage. Warren's, I think it's important to sort of step back and think that Warren's achievement occurred at a time, in American history. When those achievements occurred, remains as an inspiration, I think, to us. And I think this is an important picture. Warren got his PhD really 1 year after the Little Rock Nine. in 1957. Warren got his BS in 1958. I think, you know, it's important to just take a minute and think about that. What was going on in our country when Warren got his BS? He got his PhD here at Penn State 1 year after the Birmingham protests. You know, this was what was happening in our country where Warren got his PhD. He joined NCAR around the time of the Voting Rights Act. And Warren addresses some of these issues in his second book. But I think this perspective is really important in terms of understanding and how his courage has really been an inspiration. And so his courage has inspired us to achieve and make a difference. This courage that I think that it's important to take stock of, this courage has been an inspiration to achieve and make a difference. And it's sort of underscoring what Marshall talked about, is really achieving, being rigorous, but also at the same time making a difference. Marshall talked about the program at Howard, and so his courage has really been an inspiration of us to really build this program at Howard that's really strong in research and strong in academics in terms of preparing traditionally underrepresented students, but at the same time contributing to the science. And so in terms of research, for a small program, we really grew sponsored research in that program over a 12-year period. But while doing that, had a presence in the literature. In terms of making a difference, Marshall sort of alluded to this, and Vernon may talk about it a little bit. Yes, it's not enough. Bill's right. Marshall talked about the 2%. We still have a long way to go. But we've been kind of doing our part at Howard in holding up, our end of the deal. And so from about 1999 to 2014. We graduated over more than 50 students at the master's and PhD level. I won't go through the details here, but these are some of the statistics. The numbers are small, so with this kind of rate of graduation, we've been impacting the national statistics. Again, they're onesies and twosies, but still very much important. And I think 1 year in 2006, 2007, the only degrees for African Americans, PhDs, really came out of Howard. And so we've had an impact. And we've also had an impact on Hispanic Americans as well. That was just at Howard. The North Center for Atmospheric Sciences that Vernon and I conceptualized and Vernon continues to lead today, has had a broader impact. It's a consortium, so it includes Howard University, Jackson State, University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, UTEP, Albany, and Maryland. And these are the numbers that I won't go through the details just in the interest of time, but has had a bigger impact. This includes undergraduates as well. I think one of the important things that we focused on is not only producing these numbers, but capacity building. That's an important, objective for us, especially in this kind of consortium, is to really build the capacity to continue to do good research and continue to produce good students. And again, research impact is sort of over here. I'd be remiss, and Vernon knows this, if I didn't mention one of the gems of this endeavor, sort of the Howard University Beltsville Research Program. Has been really one of the gems of the effort at Howard. And really we developed this capability to take long-term measurements so we can better understand, help to better understand weather, climate, and air quality prediction. And also hands-on student training. We felt that was another important thing to do. We were producing these students, but at the same time, we wanted really to provide them with hands-on experience. And so there's some famous people. There's Marshall, and there's somebody who's coming up and speaking after me. There's some famous people in their youth. And so it was a community effort. It wasn't just those of us at Howard University, but it was really a community effort. And some of the colleagues that you hear from today and some of the colleagues around the country really helped. Not only at Beltsville, also helped in the program, and Warren did as well. Warren, I can't tell you how many times Warren came down to DC and came over to Howard and gave a talk or just talked to students. And Marshall talked about the meetings at AMS. But at Beltsville, Beltsville has contributed to a number of scientific issues. Understanding atmospheric surface and interaction within this urban sort of rural interface. That was one thing we really wanted to do. A little bit to aerosol chemistry and how clouds impact, how aerosols impact clouds. And one of the things I thought we really did well was really understanding the boundary layer and how to observe the boundary layer. And so we've developed over 10 years of measurements of ozone, of moisture, of temperature, of winds in the boundary layer and upper atmosphere. Satellite Cal-Val, we were close to NASA, so we worked really well with NASA on satellite Cal-Val, again, looking at processes in the boundary layer. And developing, again, as I said, ways to observe the boundary layer through active sensing. And today, the National Academy of Sciences just did a report on the importance of the boundary layer. The Decadal Survey talked about, one of the top recommendations from the Decadal Survey in terms of climate and air quality is really better observations of the boundary layer. And, in the 2011 study From the Ground Up, it mentioned Beltsville as an exemplar for the kinds of studies that are needed to really understand. In fact, they encourage the development of other facilities and other capabilities across the country as what we were doing here to really understand the boundary layer. It had an impact on me. This experience, again, and Warren's mentorship had an impact on me. As Fujian mentioned, now I'm director of this Atmospheric Sciences Research Center at Albany, but one of the really fun things I do is that I oversee this New York State MeasureNet, which is the largest and most advanced system of its kind in the country. And the experiences that I got at Beltsville and at Howard really has come in handy in designing and developing it and overseeing one of these systems. Overseeing these systems is one of the things currently in my portfolio. So Warren's great, and Warren has always been as a role model. Warren has always displayed grace and dignity publicly. Mary, I don't know about being at home, but publicly, publicly he's always displayed grace and dignity. He wears it all that. Oh, okay. I got a good picture. I'm going to finish this on a good picture for you. And that's been, again, it's been inspiring, and it's been, it's been something that I sort of watched, since, and try to model myself as. And one particular thing that Warren has done, and I talked earlier with respect to his book, and I think it's graceful. I define this as being graceful. He's a student of history, and when you talk to him, and sometimes when he gives talks, he always gives a historical perspective, and he's given deference, to those that have come before him. And he's tried to publicize to the lectures that he's given the importance of, scientists of color, African American scientists that has come before him. And these next pictures, I'm not going to say much, but Warren gave a talk at Howard, and somehow I had a copy of his talk, and so these pictures come from Warren's. He opened his talk with, talking about, Ben Banneker, talking about Charles Drew, talking about Daniel Williams, talking about David Blackwell, he talks a lot about George Carruthers. A lot. Most of the talk that I've seen him, he's sort of, when he gives this kind of sort of broader talks, he talks about George Carruthers, June Cobb, Percy Julian, Shirley Jackson, Ernest Just, Charles Anderson, and Warren. And so talking about grace and talking about the bow tie, I've always seen him like that. So, in closing, you know, I wanted to share these thoughts with you. Again, you know, for me, as a role model, you know, Warren has illuminated my path. Again, with his rigor, his wisdom, you know, his courage has been incredibly important, you know, and his grace. Thank you.